before anybody was involved. When then I said, okay, I think I get it. Yeah, the Fred Rogers of it all. When she and I corresponded about trying to find something to do together.
For decades, Tom Hanks kept quiet about his first wife, Samantha Lewes. At 69, he finally speaks, and what he reveals about love, loss, and regret will shock you deeply. Let's deep dive in. At 69 years old, Tom Hanks has finally opened a door he kept locked for decades. For years, he charmed the world with performances that seemed to embody every kind of love, every kind of loss, every kind of hope. But behind the curtain of Hollywood's most beloved actor, there was always a silence about the first woman who shaped him, the first woman who shared his dreams before anyone else knew his name. Samantha Lewes, the woman he married young, the woman who bore his children, the woman whose absence left a wound he never fully healed. Today, at last, Tom Hanks speaks about her. And when he does, the truth will leave you gasping. His voice trembles not because he has forgotten her, but because he has remembered her so vividly. For Tom, the story of Samantha is not just the story of his first marriage. It is the story of his youth, of the hunger and the fear, of the beginnings of fame, of the cost of ambition, and of the way love can survive even after a relationship ends. He does not speak in numbers, in dates, in timelines. He speaks in memories. The laughter of a young couple with barely enough money to pay rent. The nervousness of two dreamers stepping into a future no one else believed in. The pride of holding a newborn child while the world felt impossibly large. These are the images that pour from him now, at 69, when the years have softened his voice but sharpened his clarity. Samantha Lewes was not a celebrity. She did not chase cameras, nor did she live for red carpets. She was an actress for a time, appearing in small projects, but her world was not measured in box office numbers. Her world was her children, her small circle, her private moments. She was the woman who stood beside Tom Hanks before the Oscars, before Forrest Gump, before he became a global icon. She loved the man, not the star. And that is why, when Tom Hanks speaks of her now, there is a weight in his words. Because he knows the world remembers him as the icon, but he remembers himself as the young man she once believed in when no one else did. The two of them met when they were impossibly young, students chasing dreams that felt more like fantasies. Tom was awkward, uncertain, but alive with energy. Samantha was steady, thoughtful, and kind. Together they built a little world, fragile and uncertain, but theirs. They married in 1978, when Tom was only 21. It was not a wedding filled with luxury. There were no magazine spreads, no lavish celebrations. What they had was love, and what they promised each other was hope. For a time, that was enough. But love at 21 is not the same as love at 40. And when Tom looks back now, he admits this with a kind of painful honesty. He was too young, too unformed, too restless to understand what marriage required. He says this not to excuse himself, but to acknowledge the truth. Samantha deserved more than he could give at that time. She deserved stability. She deserved patience. She deserved a man who had already found himself. But Tom was still searching. He was chasing roles, chasing recognition, chasing the identity that would one day become the Tom Hanks the world loves. In that chase, something fragile began to break. And yet, even as cracks formed, the love remained. Their children, Colin and Elizabeth, became the anchors of their world. Colin, born in 1977, would grow up to follow in his father's footsteps as an actor, carving out his own career. Elizabeth, born in 1982, would remain more private, but equally cherished. For both children, Samantha was not just their mother. She was their grounding force, the quiet stability in a life that was anything but normal. Tom Hanks, even at the height of his career, has always spoken of his children with reverence. And when he speaks of Samantha now, at 69, he does so through the lens of fatherhood. He acknowledges her strength, her sacrifices, her devotion. He knows their children are her greatest legacy, and in his eyes, they are the fortune she left behind. The marriage did not last. By 1987, Tom and Samantha divorced, the pressures of youth, career, and change finally becoming too great. For the world, it was just another Hollywood split, another couple who could not survive the spotlight. But for Tom, it was personal, painful, and permanent. Divorce may end a marriage, but it does not end the bond of having shared children, of having shared a part of life that no one else can understand. He carried that bond with him for years, even as he remarried, even as he built a new life with Rita Wilson. And now, decades later, he admits what he once could not say, that a part of him always belonged to Samantha. Not romantically, not in the way people often imagine, but in the way that two people who built something together always carry each other. At 69, Tom's reflections on Samantha are not bitter. They are tender. He does not dwell on the failures. He dwells on the lessons. He remembers the nervousness of fatherhood, the joy of youth, the pain of mistakes. He remembers her laughter, her steadiness, her quiet strength. He remembers the way she looked at him before the world knew his name. And that is why his words are so powerful now. Because they are not the words of a man defending himself or justifying his choices. They are the words of a man finally willing to admit how deeply one woman shaped him. The gasp comes not from scandal, but from sincerity. Tom Hanks, the man who has played heroes, everyman figures, and icons, is suddenly vulnerable. He admits he was not ready. He admits he made mistakes. He admits he owes more to Samantha Lewes than he ever said before. And he admits it now, not to rewrite history, but to honor it. Because, at 69, the urgency of time sharpens perspective. He knows that the stories we leave behind are not just the ones told in films, but the ones told in love. Samantha's name, once whispered only in the shadows of his biography, is now spoken with reverence. He speaks of her as if she is still here, as if her presence never truly left. And in a way, it never did. She lives in Colin, in Elizabeth, in the lessons Tom carried into his second marriage, in the wisdom he now offers to the world. She lives in the memories that still make him smile, and in the regrets that still make him pause. As Tom Hanks reflects now at 69, he admits that the very thing that brought him recognition was also what chipped away at his marriage with Samantha Lewes: his career. In the early years, acting was not a guarantee, it was a gamble. Every audition meant anxiety. Every paycheck meant relief. Every role meant hope that the next would come. Samantha lived through that uncertainty with him, and at first, it bound them together. They were young dreamers, clinging to one another as the world tested their resolve. But when success finally arrived, it arrived like a storm. Tom began to win roles that pulled him out of the quiet life they once shared. Long hours, endless travel, the pressure to perform not only on stage, but also in the public eye. Suddenly, the man Samantha had married was not just Tom. He was Tom Hanks, a name beginning to rise in Hollywood. And with that rise came attention, opportunity, and temptations that could unravel any marriage, let alone one formed when both partners were still finding themselves. Tom admits now that he was not prepared for that transformation. One day, he was a struggling actor, sharing nervous laughs with Samantha about unpaid bills. And the next, he was fielding calls from agents, producers, and directors who saw him as the next big thing. Samantha, steady and private by nature, watched as her husband became something larger than life. She wanted him to succeed, of course, but she also wanted the man she had married. the man who once promised her that family would always come first. Balancing those two desires became harder with every passing year. In public, they smiled. In private, the cracks began to show. Tom himself has confessed that he was too young to understand what true commitment meant. He thought love alone would be enough, that affection could smooth over the pressures of ambition. But love is not only emotion, it is daily work, it is sacrifice, it is the willingness to slow down when the other needs you. Tom did not always slow down, and in the whirlwind of his career's ascent, Samantha felt the weight of absence. It was not simply his absence from home, but his absence in spirit. Even when he was present, his mind was often elsewhere. Scripts, auditions, career moves. The fire that once burned only for their shared life had expanded to include the dreams of millions. Samantha became the anchor, raising their children, holding the home together, giving him stability while quietly shouldering her own loneliness. Tom does not excuse himself for this. At 69, he looks back and says plainly that he failed her in ways he could not see at the time. He loved her, yes, but he was consumed by ambition, by the need to prove himself, by the belief that his career was their shared future. What he could not see was that she needed him more than the world did. By the time he realized it, the distance between them had grown too wide. In 1987, their marriage ended. The divorce was not the kind of scandal that splashes across tabloids. It was quiet, almost dignified, as if both of them knew shouting would not heal anything. They parted ways officially, but their bond through their children meant they would never truly separate. For Samantha, it was a painful chapter, one that left her raising their children while Tom's star continued to rise. For Tom, it was a lesson in humility. He had lost the woman who had known him before fame, the woman who had walked with him through his raw beginnings. He remarried in 1988 to actress Rita Wilson, and together they built one of Hollywood's most admired partnerships. But even as he embraced new love, the shadow of Samantha never disappeared. She remained the mother of his first children, the first witness to his struggles, the first believer in his dream. And though Tom rarely spoke about her in interviews, those who knew him closely understood that her presence was still felt, quiet, but undeniable. Looking back now, Tom admits the divorce was not just a legal end. It was a personal failure that haunted him. He has said he felt guilt for breaking apart a family, guilt for not being ready to be the man Samantha deserved, guilt for leaving her with the burden of carrying so much alone. These confessions, coming at 69, are raw, stripped of the polished narratives Hollywood often prefers. He does not tell this story as a celebrity. He tells it as a man who finally understands the cost of his choices. And the cost was high. Divorce did not just separate two people, it shaped the lives of Colin and Elizabeth. Tom knows that. He has said that children carry the weight of their parents' choices in ways they often cannot articulate. Colin has spoken about how he saw both of his parents struggle, how he understood even as a boy that love can be fragile. Elizabeth, quieter and more private, carried her own experience of that split. Tom, reflecting now, sees his children not only as blessings, but as reminders of Samantha's strength. She raised them with grace, even as her own life carried sorrows. The story of Samantha Lewes is not simply the story of Tom Hanks' first marriage. It is the story of a woman who lived in the shadows of fame, who carried herself with dignity, even as her private battles deepened. It is the story of how love can begin in hope and end in heartbreak, yet still leave behind something beautiful. At 69, Tom Hanks finally opens up about those years with a tone that is neither defensive nor bitter. It is honest, tender, and filled with recognition. He says he would not be the man he is today without those years. He would not be the father he became without those lessons. He would not be able to love Rita as deeply as he does now without first learning, through failure, how fragile love can be. Samantha's place in his story is permanent, and that is why, when he speaks her name now, it feels sacred. Not because she was perfect, not because he was perfect, but because together they created something that outlived them both. A love that transformed into family, a bond that survived even the breaking of vows. The story of Tom Hanks and Samantha Lewes does not end with divorce. Divorce was simply a shift, a rearrangement of roles, but the bond remained. The real ending came years later, and it is here that Tom Hanks' voice breaks when he speaks at 69. Because what came next was not the end of a marriage, but the end of a life. Samantha Lewes was diagnosed with bone cancer. The words themselves carry a weight that freezes time. For Tom, hearing those words was like being forced to relive the helplessness of youth. That same helplessness he felt when he was young and uncertain about the future. Only now, the stakes were far greater. This was not about bills or auditions. This was about life and death, about the mother of his children, about the woman who had once been his partner in everything. When Samantha learned of her illness, she chose privacy. She was not a woman who wanted sympathy from tabloids, not someone who would let the public gaze invade her suffering. She carried herself with quiet dignity, and she chose to fight in silence. But Tom Hanks could not remain silent. He was no longer her husband, but he was still her family. He was still bound to her by Colin and Elizabeth, by memories, by a love that had changed form but never disappeared. Tom supported her through those years in ways that were rarely spoken about publicly. He helped financially, making sure she had access to the best treatment, the best doctors, the most advanced care. But more than money, he gave his presence. He visited, he called, he checked in. For a man who spent much of his youth running toward fame, he spent those years running back toward her, toward the woman who had once given him everything she had. Colin and Elizabeth were young adults by then, trying to make sense of the cruel reality that their mother was slipping away. Tom stood with them, guiding them, reassuring them, reminding them that love does not end with illness. He tried to be strong, but in his private moments, he broke down. At 69, when he tells this part of the story, he does not pretend otherwise. He admits that he wept, that he raged, that he begged for more time. He admits that losing Samantha was a pain deeper than he had ever shown the public. Samantha's illness lasted long enough for her family to prepare, but not long enough for them to ever truly accept. In 2002, she passed away at just 49 years old. Gone too soon, gone too quietly, gone before she could see her children's futures unfold. For Tom, that moment was devastating. He had experienced loss before in life, but this loss felt like a final punctuation to a chapter he had never wanted to close. He says now that standing at her funeral was like standing in two places at once. In one place, he was Tom Hanks, the actor admired around the world, the man whose face was known in every country. In the other place, he was simply Tom, the young man who had once held Samantha's hand in tiny apartments, who had once laughed with her about dreams too big to imagine, who had once made promises he could not keep but meant with all his heart. He was both men at once, and in that moment, he felt broken. Colin and Elizabeth carried the grief in their own ways. Colin, already beginning his career, often spoke about his mother with deep affection, acknowledging her sacrifices and her influence. Elizabeth, more private, held her memories close, allowing the pain to shape her quietly. Tom, meanwhile, shouldered his own sorrow, but also theirs. He knew that his children had lost their mother, and no amount of success, no amount of love from him could replace her presence. He could give them stability, comfort, opportunities, but he could not give them the sound of her voice or the warmth of her embrace. That reality haunted him, and it still does when he speaks of it today. Samantha's death also forced Tom to look at himself differently. He had built a career on stories of resilience, hope, and human connection. He had played characters who survived tragedy, who found love, who discovered redemption. But here was a tragedy that no script could soften, no performance could resolve. He realized that the strength of those stories came from real pain, and he carried that pain into his art. Films like Road to Perdition and later works carried a weight, a maturity that reflected a man who had lived through devastating loss. Audiences may not have known it at the time, but Samantha's absence was echoing through his performances. At 69, Tom admits that part of him still talks to her. He says he still feels her presence in quiet moments, that he still wonders what she would think of their children, of his career, of his life. He wonders if she would have been proud, if she would have forgiven the ways he failed, if she would have laughed at the ways he still stumbles. He does not claim to know the answers, but he admits that the questions never leave him. The gasp comes here because we finally see Tom Hanks, the man who has carried the world's love for decades, admit that he still carries the ache of one woman's loss. For all the fame, all the awards, all the joy he has given audiences, he is still a man who mourns. He is still a man who cannot escape the shadow of what cancer took from him, from his children, from the world. Samantha Lewes was not a celebrity, but her story became one of the most defining parts of his own. Her passing also deepened Tom's commitment to family. He has often spoken about how Rita Wilson, his second wife, was his rock, his partner, his source of joy. But he also admits that Samantha's absence made him cherish Rita more fiercely. It made him double down on love, on loyalty, on the daily work of marriage. He had learned through pain that nothing lasts forever, and he refused to take for granted the gift of a partner who stood beside him. That, too, was part of Samantha's legacy. For Colin and Elizabeth, the loss of their mother remained the defining scar of their lives. But Tom has tried to ensure that her memory is never erased, never overshadowed. At 69, when he opens up now, he does so partly for them. He wants the world to know who Samantha was, not as a footnote in his biography, but as a woman who shaped him, shaped their children, and deserves to be remembered with reverence. And so, the story of Samantha Lewes is not simply the story of Tom Hanks' first wife. It is the story of love that began too young, broke under the weight of ambition, but endured through respect and through the bond of children. It is the story of illness that silenced a life too soon, and the story of a man who still weeps when he remembers her. At 69, Tom Hanks carries Samantha Lewes with him in ways that cannot be seen but can always be felt. He speaks of her not as a chapter long closed, but as a presence that still guides him. To the world, he is the actor who made us laugh in Big, cry in Philadelphia, believe in miracles in The Green Mile, and find wonder in Forrest Gump. But to himself, he is still the young man who once promised a woman named Samantha that they could build a life together. He did not keep all those promises, but her spirit still whispers through the man he became. When Tom looks at Colin and Elizabeth today, he does not just see his children. He sees Samantha's eyes, her strength, her love written into their very being. Every success they have is a reflection of her. Every step forward is part of the legacy she left behind. Tom knows that fame can fade, but family never does. At 69, his most precious role is not that of an actor, but that of a father who still carries the memory of their mother with him. He admits that for many years he kept this part of his story quiet. He spoke about Samantha only in fragments, only when asked, only when it was safe. But now, with time behind him and mortality closer than ever, he no longer hides the truth. He speaks openly because he understands that silence dishonors her. He speaks because he wants the world to know that she mattered. She mattered not only to him, but to their children, and through them, to the world. Samantha Lewes was never a celebrity in the way Tom Hanks became one. Yet her influence is woven into every part of his journey. She was there in the beginning, when the dream was fragile. She was there when the children were born, and when the world was uncertain. And though she was gone too soon, she remains here in the way Tom values love, the way he cherishes loyalty, the way he respects the fragile gift of time. That is her legacy, and it is one that Tom Hanks will never stop carrying. At 69, he has nothing left to prove to Hollywood. His career is carved in stone. His name is written in history. But in his heart, there is still a quiet place reserved for Samantha. He does not speak of her with scandal or bitterness. He speaks with gratitude, with honesty, with a tenderness that reveals just how much she shaped him. That honesty is shocking not because it is sensational, but because it is rare. Rare to see a man so beloved, so celebrated, admit that even he carries wounds that will never heal. When he talks about Samantha now, his words are not about fame or regret, but about humanity. He reminds us that even the most admired people in the world live with losses that shape them forever. He reminds us that love, even when it does not last forever, can still be real, still be transformative, still be eternal in memory. He reminds us that behind the spotlight, every person has a story that can make them weep. And so, when Tom Hanks opens up at 69, the gasp comes not from scandal, but from truth. The truth is that his story is not just about success, but about love, loss, and legacy. The truth that Samantha Lewes, though gone, remains the quiet heartbeat of his past. The truth that her name still lives in his words, his children, and in the man he has become. Robert Redford once said that the measure of a person's life is not what they achieve, but what they leave behind. For Tom Hanks, part of what he leaves behind will always be Samantha. Not as a headline, not as a footnote, but as a soul who helped shape him. And when we see Tom Hanks on screen, when we celebrate his career, when we admire his kindness, we are also admiring the unseen influence of Samantha Lewes. If Tom Hanks' story touched your heart, share this video, subscribe for more powerful journeys, and join us as we honor the unseen stories that shape the legends we admire.